Welcome to the Rime Buddhist Center's Dharma Talk podcast, Achieving Peace Through Compassion. This podcast is a recording of the Dharma Talks given during our Sunday service. This talk was given by Lama Matthew Palden Gocha.
So I mentioned in the announcements that this coming Saturday is Chokol Duchen, a celebration of one of the four great anniversaries of the Buddhist calendar, the day where the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma for the first time at Deer Park outside of Varanasi. And there he taught the Four Noble Truths to five ascetics who had once been companions. And the tradition holds this day in special regard. Whatever we do on that day, whatever practice, whatever kindness, whatever restraint is said to ripen many times over. But I want to start somewhere the festival calendar usually skips right past. And I want to start with the 7 weeks before that event. Because between the night the Buddha woke up under the tree and the morning he opened his mouth to teach, something almost didn't happen. He almost didn't teach at all. I wonder how often we sit with that fact. We tend to imagine the awakening and the teaching career as almost one continuum unfolding, like a river that just keeps flowing downhill because that's what rivers do. But the text I want to reference today is the Lalita Vistara Sutra, also translated as the Play in Full, which tells a very different story. It tells us that the Buddha sat under that tree after his awakening and turned the whole thing over in his mind and nearly decided to keep it to himself. And someone had to ask him not to. Two someones, actually, twice in different chapters, two different registers. And I want to walk through both of them with you this morning because I think they're teaching us something about how the Dharma actually moves through the world, both then and now. The first asking is quiet and almost domestic. It happens in chapter 24 of the Lalita Vistara Sutra, which the text simply calls Trapusha and Balika. So picture the scene. The Buddha has been sitting at the foot of the Bodhi tree for 7 weeks without moving, absorbed in the bliss of what he just realized. No food, no water. And two merchant brothers, Trapusha and Balika, are passing by with a caravan of 500 carts loaded down with goods from a long trading trip. And their oxen just simply stop, won't move, not for the whip, not for anything, until someone offers them a handful of lotus flowers. Because apparently that's what it takes to move a particularly stubborn ox in this story. So in the story, a local goddess then appears and tells the caravan not to be afraid, and eventually the two oxen lead the cart straight to where the Buddha's sitting. A deity in the sky calls down to the merchant and tells them plainly, there's a Buddha here, acting for the welfare of the world, and he hasn't eaten in 7 weeks. If you want to do something good for yourselves, feed them. And so they do. Their cows back home had inexplicably started yielding pure, clarified butter that same morning, which everyone took as an omen. A Brahmin who happened to be a former kinsman of theirs, reborn in the God realms, appears and reminds them of something they had apparently forgotten. They had once made an aspiration that when this being, the Buddha, reached awakening, he would eat their food and turn the wheel of Dharma. This, he tells them, is that moment. I really wish we had somebody to really just mention, like, okay, here's a very important moment. Usually we're not quite as tuned into that. And so they prepare a meal. They clean out a jeweled bowl, probably worth more than most of us will ever spend on anything in our lives. And they fill it with honey and rice. And they walk up to the man who has been sitting motionless for weeks. And they say to him, Venerable one, please accept and receive us. We beg that you eat this well-prepared meal. That's the whole request. Not a philosophical inquiry, not even at the point really about the Dharma at all. It's an offer of food from two traveling merchants who happened to be in the right place at the right time. And the text tells us that the Buddha ate what they gave him and then tossed the bowl into the sky where a divine king caught it and is still, to this day, worshiping it with it in the Brahmin realm. which is just one of those details I love because it's so completely unnecessary, yet really charming and adds to the story. So then, after the Buddha blesses the two brothers with a long and genuine, tender set of verses, wishing them good fortune, coming and going, wishing them good fortune of seeing their families again, then the chapter closes with one plain sentence. They went for refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma. Did you catch it? Something's missing. Not the three jewels, just two. There's no Sangha yet to go for refuge in. Triapusha and Balinka are, by tradition, the very first lay disciples in the history of this teaching, and they became disciples not because they asked for a profound question about emptiness, but because they asked to feed a hungry man and he let them. Think about that. I know I think about that often because so many of us, and myself included, carry around this quiet idea that we're not yet worthy to approach the path. Not until we have the right question, the right degree of seriousness, the right vocabulary. But Trapusha and Balika had none of that. All they had was a caravan, some very stubborn ox, and a really nice bowl. And they asked with what they had, and the door opened right away. Now, that seventh week, according to the Lalita Vistara's own chronology, something else was happening in the Buddha's mind. And this is where chapter 25, the exhortation, and it's really the heart of today's talk. The text tells us that while he was sitting alone at the foot of the tree, the Buddha had a thought about, in the text words, the conventions of the world. And I want to read this close to the original phrasing because I think the specific words matter. This truth that I realized and awakened to its profound, peaceful, tranquil, calm, complete, hard to see, hard to comprehend, and impossible to conceptualize since it is inaccessible to the intellect. Only wise, noble ones and adepts can understand it. If I were to teach this truth to others, they would not understand it. Teaching the truth would tire me out and be wrongly contested, and it would be futile. Thus, I will remain silent and keep this truth in my heart. Let's just sit with that for a moment. This isn't a false modesty. This is the fully awakened Buddha having just realized the nature of reality itself, looking out at the world and concluding that teaching it would probably be pointless. He even puts it into verse: profound, peaceful, stainless, lucid, and unconditioned. Such is the nature like truth I have realized. Were I to teach it, no one would understand, so I will silently remain in the forest. I find this comforting, honestly, because I think of many of us who try to speak about the Dharma, whether from a shrine room, Sunday morning just like this one, or just an honest conversation with a friend who's suffering, hit this same exact wall. We feel something true, and it feels completely untranslatable. We look at the gap between what we glimpsed and the words available to us, and we think, what's even the point? The Buddha, at that absolute peak of realization, had that thought first. Isn't that interesting? Almost the same like we are. Like we know what we want to say, but we just can't put it into words. But the text doesn't let him stay right there. Light radiates from the Buddha's forehead, filling the entire universe, and by means of that light, a being called the great top-knotted Brahma becomes aware of exactly what the Buddha is thinking. And Brahma's reaction is worth sitting with because he doesn't think, well, that's the Buddha's choice to make. He thinks and says twice for emphasis, alas, the world is doomed. A little dramatic. He gathers 6,800,000 other Brahmas, travels to where the Buddha is sitting, bows at his feet, and asks him directly to teach. He backs the request with verses, and I want to read you just a few lines because this is some of the most beautiful pleading in the whole text. Rama says, may you beat the kettle drum of the sublime Dharma. May you blow the conch shell of the genuine Dharma. May you erect a great sacrificial post of the Dharma. May you light the great lamp of the Dharma. May you rain down the waters of Dharma most sublime. May you ferry across all those wallowing in the ocean of existence. May you liberate all those afflicted with severe illness. May you quell those tormented by the fires of afflictions. There's some real desperation in that language. Kettle drums, conch shells, sacrificial posts, lamps. Rama isn't asking politely. He's throwing every image of urgent public announcement he has at the Buddha because he understands something the Buddha in this moment is somehow forgetting. That the value of realization isn't only in having it, it's in what happens when it reaches someone else. And the Buddha, the text tells us, after that kind of pleading, looked upon the world with compassion and silently acquiesced. And so here is where the story gets more interesting than I really remember it being when I first read it. And it's the part I most want you to walk away with because the Buddha's decision doesn't stick. Chapter 25 keeps going. It tells us that in order to engender respect for the Dharma in the world, and because the Dharma is exceedingly profound, the Buddha goes back into solitude and has almost the identical thought all over again. Nearly word for word, the same hesitation, the same conclusion. I will keep this to myself. So Brahma has to go find Indra in this sutra called Chakra, Lord of the gods, and the two of them, along with what the text describes as nearly every category of divine being imaginable, gather again and approach the Buddha a second time. And here's something really almost funny happens. Chakra goes first and offers a lovely verse. Your mind is completely liberated, like a full moon free of eclipse. May you rise, O victor in battle. May you shine the light of insight in this dark world. And the Buddha says nothing. Silence. Brahma actually has to coach him. He turns to Chakra and tells him essentially that this is not how you ask a fully awakened being to turn the wheel of Dharma. And Brahma himself gets down on one knee, robe draped over one shoulder, in the traditional gesture of supplication, and he asks again in the proper form. But the Buddha still says no. He repeats almost word for word his original hesitation and adds two more verses. My path going against the stream is profound. It is difficult to see. Since those blinded by desire do not see it, therefore teaching it will not be of any help. Beings bound to their desires are continuously swept away in the stream. I discovered this with great effort. Therefore, teaching it will not be of any help. So Brahma and Chakra, the text tells us, really are saddened and dejected, and they just simply vanish. And then this line, which really I honestly forgot that was in here until I sat down with this chapter this week. The thus one had thrice made up his mind to remain disinterested. 3 times. This isn't one dramatic moment of doubt resolved by one dramatic intervention. It's a pattern. Ask, refuse, ask, refuse. And meanwhile, in the town of Magadha, rumors start spreading that the wind has stopped blowing and the rivers have stopped flowing, which in the text way of telling us the whole world can feel when something this important is stuck. So, what changes then on the next asking? It's not a better argument. It's not a more clever verse. Brahma returns one more time, and in the middle of his supplication, he says something different. Previously in Magadha, the Dharma was impure. Therefore, impurely construed talk has emerged there. Thus, please, O sage, open the gates of nectar. They are ready to listen to the stainless Buddha Dharma. They are ready to listen. That's the shift. It stops being an argument about the nature of truth and it starts to become an argument about people waiting for it. And then the text does something. I find genuinely moving. It tells us the Buddha looks out over in the entire world with his awakened eyes and sees 3 kinds of beings. Some are, in the text phrase, sure to be wrong, meaning they won't understand no matter what he does. Some are sure to be correct, meaning they'll find their way with or without him. And some are undetermined, meaning they will understand if he teaches and will not if he doesn't. The text gives the image in this sutra gives us a pond full of lotuses. Some are still submerged under the water. Some sit exactly at the surface, about to break through, and some have already risen above it, blooming in the open air. And the Buddha's compassion, the text tells us, is aimed specifically at the ones caught right at the surface. Not the ones already freed, not the ones who would never come up for air no matter what he did, the ones right at the edge who could go either way depending on whether someone reaches down and helps. That to me might be the actual center of this whole story. The Buddha doesn't decide to teach because he suddenly believes everyone will understand him. He decides to teach because some will, and his compassion will not let them walk away from that group for the sake of tidiness. It said, O Brahma, the gates of nectar are open. Those sentient beings of Magadha, with ears and with devotion, who constantly listen with attention and without doing harm. Isn't that wonderful? There's one more small moment in this chapter I don't want to skip because it says something about how the Buddha holds this decision once he's made it. Four gods who live in the Bodhi tree itself ask him where he intends to teach, and he tells them at the deer park outside Varanasi. And they push back gently. They tell him, Varanasi is a small city. The deer park has limited shade. And wouldn't it a larger, wealthier, more impressive city really serve his purposes better? But the Buddha refuses. He tells them that 91 billion previous Buddhas turned the wheel of Dharma in that exact grove, and he intends to do the same. And I quote, I remember that 91 billion previous Buddhas turned the sublime wheel of Dharma in that supreme grove named after the sages, where peace, tranquility, and concentration are actualized, and deer always dwell. Thus, I too will turn the sublime wheel in the supreme grove named after the sages. He isn't choosing the place with the best audience or the most impressive backdrop. He's choosing the place that has held this particular kind of moment before, again and again, quietly for a very long time. I love the detail because it undercuts any temptation to read the story as a hero's journey with a decision made on grand public stage. He says yes to the teaching, and then he chooses the smallest, plainest possible venue to do it in. So in chapter 26, picks up the story on the road itself and gives us something chapter 25 doesn't. At the Buddha's own resolve, stated flatly before he's even arrived, along the way he passes a wandering mendicant who stops him and asks, in essence, who his teacher was. And the Buddha's reply has none of the hesitation we just spent all this time sitting with. He says, I do not have any teacher. There is no one like me. I alone am the perfect Buddha, cool and without any flaws. And the mendicant asks where he's headed. And the Buddha answers, like a refrain, naming the act before he's even done it. I am on my way to Varanasi. When I arrive in the city of Kashi, I shall turn the wheel of Dharma that has never been turned in this world. Notice what has happened. This is the same being three separate times told the two gods that teaching will not be of any help. And now, walking alone towards Varanasi, he tells a total stranger exactly what he intends to do with no hedging at all. And the asking's finished. What's simply left is walking there and doing it. But the chapter isn't done complicating the story for us. When the Buddha reaches Deer Park, his five former companions, the ascetics he's practiced alongside for years, see him coming and they make a plan. They decide he's failed, he's gone soft, given up the discipline that might have gotten him somewhere. So they agree among themselves, no greeting, no rising to meet him, no help with his robes or his bowl. At most, they'll leave out a spare seat in case he wants it. And then this happens. The closer the thus gone one came to the five companions, the more overwhelming his splendor and radiance became. They began to quiver in their seats, and then their prior plan fell apart completely, and they all stood up from their seats. One goes to greet him. One takes his robe and bowl. One prepares his seat. One brings water for his feet. Nobody argues them out of their resentment. Nobody persuades them. They simply cannot stay seated in his presence, the text says, because no living being can. It's the mirror image of everything we've been tracking this morning. Brahma had to ask three times because words alone weren't enough to move the Buddha. The five companions don't get to ask anything at all because presence alone is enough to move them. So here's what I want to leave you with as Chokul Duchen approaches. We tend to think of the wheel turning as something the Buddha simply did out of the overflow of his own compassion, entirely on his own initiative. And there's truth in that. Ultimately, it was his compassion that answered. But this text, we actually have doesn't let him get there alone. It takes two merchants offering him a bowl of food because that's what they had to give. It takes a God who won't accept silence as the final answer and comes back to not once but three times who has to coach another God on how to ask properly, who changes his argument until he finds the one that actually lands. Someone had to ask, and then someone had to ask again and again and again. I think that's worth carrying into our own practice. Whatever truth any of us have glimpsed in meditation, in a hard year, in a moment of genuine kindness, we didn't know that we had within us, there's a real temptation to conclude the way the Buddha almost did, that it's too subtle to be useful to anyone, too easily misunderstood, not worth the trouble of trying to say it out loud. And maybe sometimes that's even true. But this text suggests the way past that hesitation isn't a better argument that we make to ourselves. It's someone else showing up and asking. It's being willing to be the merchant with the bowl or the God on one knee, refusing to let a friend's real understanding stay locked inside them because it seems easier that way. And it's also being willing when someone asks something of us, however small, however unpolished, the request, a bowl of food, a clumsy verse, a question we think we're too inexperienced to answer, to treat that asking the way the Buddha eventually did as a reason to finally speak up. I want to close with what actually got said once all the asking was finished. When the Buddha finally sat down with his five companions in Deer Park, he didn't open with the sweep of the gods and light and cosmic proclamation we've been hearing about all morning. He opened with something almost clinical. What is suffering? It is the pain that accompanies birth, growing old, falling sick, and dying. In short, the five perpetuating aggregates are suffering. This is what we call suffering. And after each of these four truths, suffering, its origin, its cessation, the path, he adds the same quiet refrain. This teaching I had not heard previously. I understood it by intensely and introspectively focusing my mind on suffering. In this way, my wisdom, vision, understanding, intellect, intelligence, knowledge, and insight became manifest. Say that against everything that we've just walked through. All that pleading, all that light filling the universe, all those kettle drums and conch shells. And what finally gets spoken is the plainest diagnosis imaginable, delivered four times, each time insisting, I didn't receive this from anyone. I found it by myself by looking directly. The text tells us that he taught it a third time, and then something shifted in one of the companions who, back at the start of the chapter, really hadn't gone along with the plan to snub him. It said, when the wheel of Dharma was turned with its 12 aspects, Kundalini understood the meaning, and so the three jewels came to be. That's the line I want to leave you with. Not Brahma's pleading, not the kettle drums, not even the Buddha's own resolve on the road. This one sentence, almost thrown away in the middle of the chapter. One person actually understood for the first time anywhere, and in that moment of understanding, something that had only ever been two jewels back when Trapusha and Balinka took refuge under the Bodhi tree, finally becomes three: the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Someone had to ask, and then someone had to understand, and both were necessary. Neither was automatic, and both in the sutra keeps insisting are still available to us this morning and in the rooms where we're sitting.
Thank you for listening to the Rime Buddhist Center's Dharma Talk podcast. Music was provided by Barefoot Bran Music. Please consider supporting the Rime Buddhist Center by making a donation at our website at www.rimecenter.org/donate.